An ultimatum was issued against the coup leaders in Niger by Ecowas, and thousands of Nigerians took to the streets yesterday on Independence Day as a sign of support for the military. On the other hand, Nigerian troops are reported to be moving to the Niger border, where they will wait for the Ecowas directive. Many have criticized Ecowas for threatening to invade Niger. We are now joined by SABC News International News Editor, Sophie Mokoena, to speak more about this and also this looming deadline. Good morning. Thank you so much for making time for us. There was a delegation that was sent to Niger, including the president of Nigeria himself. Do we know what the outcomes of that meeting was?
Well, clearly the leaders of the coup are not moving. They are maintaining that they are going to continue. They are saying that they are tired of the government of the president, who is currently at the presidential palace, because most of the time when they are fighting the insurgents in that region, you know that Niger is a base for France and the United States of America to fight terror and the insurgents. They get told that they must wait for the directive from France, and therefore they feel that they have been controlled by France, including the mineral resources in that country, particularly the uranium, and therefore they are saying they are not going to change, and they are going to continue with the changes.
Yeah, lots of criticism against the coup leaders, of course, that has now taken place. You speak about the base of the US military as well as the French in Niger. What are the possibilities of them actually responding in support of what ECOWAS is saying? The African Union has made the same call as well and said that the standby force would be on standby should the need be, and if the deadline is not met. Could we see a full-on war blowing up in Niger as well as the Sahel region?
I think the West is undermining the continent. And I think countries as Nigeria, who are pushing for invasion, are undermining the frustration of people on the continent in relation to poverty and all the struggles that they are experiencing, including the plundering of the resources of Africa. If they think it's gonna be Libya, I think this time around they must think again. And if they think it's gonna be Gambia, they must think again, because you have other countries, neighboring countries, who are part of the same region. I'm talking about Mali, I'm talking about Guinea, Burkina Faso, Algeria issued a similar statement, and we are told Senegal stands in support of a move not to invade Niger, but rather focus on the talks. And therefore, I think Nigeria at the moment, at its weakest moments, in terms of the economic challenges in that country, including the leadership of the incumbent, as you know, that is being challenged in the courts in Nigeria based on the outcome of the elections recently. I think we are likely to see a proxy war in West Africa, something that is not good for the continent. And I think the African Union is found wanting. It is very weak at the moment. At the helm, you have Comoros, a small country, and therefore the advice that's given to the region and the African Union, I don't think that those advice are going to assist the continent.
What about Moussa Faki, the chairperson of the AU Commission?
Moussa Faki is the Commission chair, but remember, he comes from West Africa, and therefore he's conflicted, and therefore it is very difficult for him to really command respect among other people being from that region, and therefore it is very difficult. You'd recall that when this incident happened, he was in Russia, he was not on the continent, and therefore he is trying to gain the lost ground or trying to marshal the African Union, but it's not holding. And therefore you have the weakest African Union at the moment, particularly the Peace and Security Council, because the Peace and Security Council is supposed to convene at heads of state level to find a way and look at the proposal of ECOWAS, whether is this feasible? Yeah. We know that already Wagner, some of the members last night were told that they are already in Niger. And that is why the danger here, we are likely going to see a proxy war.
Yeah. As you're going to tell us about what the US is making of this, South Africa itself also seems to be backing what the AU is calling for.
South Africa is a member of the continental body. They have to support the position of the continental body. Secondly, they also must support the voice or the position of the Ecowas. But I think behind the scenes, I can see President Ramaphosa, South Africa, whose policy is anchored around peace talks and no aggression, supporting invasion, unless that is being sanctioned by the United Nations. And it has to be a peace mission before you can even talk about the intervention force. Because remember, you have to follow the AU charter. You can't move from peace and then you start with intervention. And therefore, I think it is a difficult one for South Africa, because this is a clear violation of the South African policy in terms of peace and security. That is why we, as a country, affirm in relation to the war in Ukraine that South Africa is not supporting any aggression, and therefore a non-aligned stand speaks to the policy of South Africa, where you have to negotiate rather than pulling out the guns. And at the time where the continent is not going to meet its target of silencing the guns. You were there at DERCO when diplomats were expressing frustration in terms of implementation of Agenda 2063 and key silencing the guns in 2030.
And let's quickly hear what the US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken had to say about this.
Strongly support the very strong leadership of Ecowas on Niger. I don't want to get ahead of where things are, but what Ecowas has done in terms of stating very clearly that there's an expectation for a return to the constitutional order and a continuation of the democratic process, and putting pressure on those responsible for interrupting the democratic order and constitutional order in Niger. We stand very much behind that. We will work closely with Ecowas, with other concerned countries. I don't want to get ahead of where things are right now, but we believe that the work that Ecowas is doing and the statements it's made are important, strong, and have our support.
Well, with that said, if you look at that particular the Sahel region, and you look at the number of countries that have the military at the head of state, the question is there a possibility at all that this matter could actually end up at the Security Council of the United Nations?
If there was to be a war, it will definitely be part of the UN Security Council agenda, and it might even end at the ICC. Perhaps the Security Council might recommend that. But you have countries with veto powers within the Security Council. Do you think Russia will agree?
Will China agree?
Exactly.
Well,
the world is in a mess.
The world is in a mess. Thank you so much. International news editor here at the SABC. Thank you so much for your time. That is Sophie Mokoena.